Stand down!
Oh my god! Okay, it's happening! Everybody stay calm!
Marvel fans, we just got some shocking news.
It looks like the MCU is heading towards a reboot.
Marvel Cinematic Universe is being reset.
Best idea they've had in years, bro.
So unless you've been living under a rock, you're probably aware that the 5th and 6th installment of the Avengers movies are currently being developed. Avengers Doomsday is set to release in December of 2026 and will be followed only a year later by Avengers Secret Wars. Now these two films are arguably the most highly anticipated MCU films of all time. A hell of a lot is riding on these films, as the MCU has lessened in popularity ever since, if we're being realistic here, the No Way Home era. Now that may sound like a crazy statement, since the MCU is still one of the top movie franchises, but it's no secret that the casual viewer has kinda dropped off the hype train in recent years. This is obviously due to many different factors. First off, after Avengers Endgame was released, culminating the Infinity Saga, obviously the pandemic hit, and for months films weren't being shown on the big screen and people were no longer going to the cinema. I truly do believe that is where the MCU's popularity started to dip, as it took quite a long while before cinemas could return to some semblance of normality. Of course, we then have the problem of Marvel pumping out way too many projects within a very, very short time span, which ultimately resulted in lower quality content. And we can't forget the third big factor towards the MCU's lack of fan support: the red pill dudes. The dudes that quite literally sit there and cry over female-led superhero movies and TV shows, calling it woke whenever the content isn't dark and broody just for the sake of it, but instead maybe features a brighter tone of color palette and more of a light-hearted theme. It's kind of funny to me when people say that the MCU has gone woke, as if superhero media hasn't always been that way. Like, you do realize what the X-Men are an allegory for, right? No? Then maybe it's time to pick up a comic book. That's all I'm saying. The slight downfall of the MCU has caused some harm in terms of success. And yes, I did specifically deploy the word slight there for a very specific reason, because not all of the MCU projects have been met with bad reviews. In fact, it seems like a lot of people are forgetting a lot of the projects that we've been graced with since Avengers Endgame release. WandaVision, Loki Season 1 and 2, Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings, Hawkeye, Spider-Man No Way Home, Black Panther Wakanda Forever, Guardians of the Galaxy 3, Deadpool and Wolverine, Daredevil Born Again, Thunderbolts, Fantastic Four, The First Steps. That's 11 projects that I would give at a bare minimum 8 out of 10 stars, with, for me personally, a lot of them even being 10-star ratings. In the grand scheme of things, there has evidently been a lot of S-tier MCU projects since the multiverse saga began that people just don't seem to talk about, and I guess there's a reason for that. The multiverse saga hasn't exactly been as well structured as the Infinity Saga was. With around 30 projects being released in just over 5 years, there's no arguing that there's been quite a lot to keep up with unless you're an avid fan. And you'd kind of think that with so much content, there'd be at least some semblance of a clear path towards the next 2 Avengers films. But in reality, this just isn't the case, is it? Only a mere few projects have shown a link to what's to come in those movies, and it was only a year ago that RDJ was announced as the main antagonist in Doomsday and Secret Wars, Doctor Doom. Now, of course, there is a reason for this, as the original plan for the upcoming Avengers movies was to feature Jonathan Majors as Kang the Conqueror, which obviously fell through for reasons that have been covered many times before. So to be fair, considering that Marvel Studios and Kevin Feige had to make a last-minute change, it makes quite a lot of sense as to why it hasn't felt like as great of a build-up. Now, with the MCU fanbase not being as strong as it once was for reasons that I've mentioned, and future plans for the franchise seeming to lack in structure, it would make a lot of sense as to why there have been a lot of recent reports about Marvel's plans to do a soft reboot after Avengers Secret Wars. Now, we are currently in the multiverse saga. With that, we've had many a crossover and have thus been introduced to different universes, as well as many different variants of characters over the past few years, including the return of Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Chris Evans' Johnny Storm the Human Torch, and of course Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, all within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And it could be said that this was the structured plan for the multiverse saga all along, as we will likely see the concept of multiversal crossovers of previous iterations of characters come to a head in Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, opening up the door for new adaptations of characters such as Wolverine, and of course the rest of the X-Men, who are also confirmed to play a major role in the upcoming Avengers movies, with the previous actors we know and love returning for one final battle. When that first trailer drops for Avengers Doomsday, and we get to see not only RDJ's return debuting the MCU's version of Victor Von Doom, but also characters like Magneto and Professor X, sharing the very same screen as Thor and Sam Wilson's Captain America, just to name a few, there is no doubt in my mind that the hype surrounding the Marvel Cinematic Universe will finally return to its natural state. Unless you're like a generational hater of fan service, these films are inevitably going to be the best movie experiences of our lifetime. There's no two ways about it. I just feel it. It's gonna inevitably bring back a lot of fans to the theatres that maybe fell out of love with the MCU because of its recent track record. But the real thing that needs to be talked about is how are Marvel going to keep fans seated for the future after Secret Wars? At this point, they just cannot afford another the MCU should have finished after Avengers Endgame type moment. They need phrases like "this is why I'm glad the MCU continued after Secret Wars" to be something that the fans scream out instead. And a soft reboot is exactly how to make this a reality. In an interview with Variety, Kevin Feige said that Secret Wars very much sets up for the future, with his full statement reading, "Secret Wars will be the catalyst for a new MCU. We're utilising that story not just to round out the stories we've been telling post-Endgame, just as importantly. And you can look at the Secret Wars comics for where that takes you. Endgame literally was about endings. Secret Wars is about beginnings." Feige has also confirmed that following the events of Avengers Secret Wars in 2027, the company will be recasting the mutants for the upcoming X-Men movie, directed by Jake Schreier, who also directed Thunderbolts, and has commented that even characters like Steve Rogers Captain America and Tony Stark Iron Man would also be eventually recasted. This is obviously huge news for Marvel fans, and I honestly did not see this happening in my entire lifetime. If you'd asked me 5 years ago if I would ever entertain the idea that Steve Rogers would be recasted with Chris Evans no longer being the MCU's Cap, I would have told you no way. And I would have said the exact same thing with regards to recasting RDJ's Iron Man. The two are arguably the best casting choices in cinematic history. So why on earth would anyone want to see the characters return with new actors when we've already gotten two perfect adaptations? But if you were to ask me the exact same question today, I'd say it actually sounds like a pretty good idea. The MCU has flopped as of recent, and what better way to revive its prime than to bring back two of its most popular characters, but not just as cameos or for one film, but actually here to stay as regulars with new castings. I honestly think it's a really good opportunity to give the roles to lesser known actors, as it would obviously be a great way to kickstart some no-names career in the industry. As of right now, it looks like the plans for the MCU after Avengers Secret Wars and the multiverse saga has ended is to bring everyone into one singular timeline. Now, I know that a lot of people don't like the multiverse as a general concept, but obviously for us comic book fans, it's a pretty vital part of the franchise. However, if it means that the stakes can feel high, just like they used to, and everyone can come back to enjoy the new MCU with absolutely no confusion whatsoever, as it opens up brand new storylines for familiar characters, alongside some lesser known characters from the comics that we haven't seen in live action before, then I'm more than down for that. The thought of seeing Wolverine, Iron Man, and Captain America all together in a shared universe just gives me straight chills, and if done right, it could easily open up the doors for a brand new wave of Marvel fans, as well as bring the MCU back to its pinnacle. If it wasn't for the fact that Marvel Studios didn't own a lot of its most popular characters when the MCU first began, such as the X-Men, Spider-Man, and the Fantastic Four, we could have actually seen this play out way earlier. While I don't necessarily hate that the mutants weren't in the MCU from the beginning, as it meant that characters like Captain America and Iron Man, who weren't actually as popular back then as they they are now were able to shine in the spotlight and become as beloved as they are in today's world, I just can't help but think what the MCU would have looked like. We likely already would have had the mutants a long time ago. But instead, we're almost 20 years into the franchise and we still have not gotten a comic accurate Cyclops suit. Speaking of which, we have actually had leaks that James Marsden will don a comic accurate Cyclops suit in Avengers Doomsday, which is obviously unbelievably hype, but leaks like that's a conversation for another video, or else this video will be about 40 minutes long, because I got a lot to say on the matter. I hope that by bringing back some of Marvel's biggest names, they don't dismiss newer characters such as Shang-Chi from building a legacy. In theory, these lesser known characters to casual moviegoers should see a bright future, in which they're eventually on par with the likes of the X-Men, just as Cap and Iron Man once weren't, but are today. Having the characters all connected within one universe, like the comics, should bring a totally new feel that we've never gotten before. And when they're all together with no confusion as to which world they've come from, the potential in crossover projects is kind of crazy to think about. I've said this before, but in a comic book storyline, you kind of just smile and say, hey, that's cool. When characters like the Hulk and the Thing fight side by side, or more often than not against each other, you don't ever really question why they're both integrated into the storyline, because why wouldn't they be? At the end of the day, they're both heroes that live in the same universe. That's exactly what we need to see in the future MCU. Throw Beast into an Avengers movie. Throw Spidey into an X-Men project. Why not? Who in their right mind wouldn't love to see that? This could easily give the MCU the most comic book feel that it's ever had. And that's exactly what is needed, right? Going back to what works best, the source material, and building a universe centered around the stories that were the blueprint for the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Now, notably, the biggest aspect of this soft reboot is obviously the Iron Man, Captain America, and X-Men recastings. So I guess the question we should be asking is who exactly should play them?